very brief.
Okay.
So let me introduce our guest speaker, Professor Shlomo Dubnov. Born in Ukraine in 1962, Dr. Shlomo Dubnov is a researcher and composer. Dr. Dubnov's education bridges electrical engineering, computer science, and music. Dr. Dubnov graduated from Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance in composition and did his PhD in computer science in Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Prior to joining UC San Diego, he served as a researcher at IRCAM, Institute for Research and Coordination in Acoustics Music, in Paris, and headed the multimedia track for the Department of Communication Systems Engineering at Ben Gurion University of the Negev. Shlomo Dubnov is a professor in the music department and affiliate professor in computer science and engineering at UC San Diego, where he has been since 2003. Professor Dubnov is a founding faculty of UCSD's Hulusioglu Data Science Institute, and he is the director of the Center for Research in Entertainment and Learning, CREL, at UCSD's Qualcomm Institute.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, there's more. Dr. Dubnov is best known for his research on musical timbre, machine improvisation, computational creativity, and the stylometry of music. He is also known for his contributions to the bispectrum and nonlinear extensions of spectral flatness. His new algorithm, called UCH AI, combines music latent diffusion model with large language models to create music out of poetry. Dr. Dubnov is a senior member of IEEE and secretary of IEEE's Technical Committee on Computer-Generated Music. His new book, Deep and Shallow, Machine Learning in Music and Audio, was published in 2023. Okay, it's also one of our readings in this course. Dr. Dubnov is also a PR of the RAGE, Raising Co-Creativity in Cyber-Human Musicianship project under the European Research Council Advanced Grant. Okay, so now let's welcome Professor Dubnov, and let me stop share and yes.
Okay, well, thank you. So, I think probably for uh, for the small forum, the best option we can have to discuss the field in general. And I think when Jigwe invited me, we can discuss so what could be interesting. I mean, it's not really about teaching more materials about sound, about computers, AI. It's more about, I don't know if the career trajectory, because it's very hard to say what is the right career trajectory, but kind of to show the possibilities and also talk maybe about my motivation and how I got to do this area. I would say today, at least in the computer science area, with all the generative AI, somehow music became more and more mainstream. So actually, almost every, I don't want to say totally every, but practically any conference on AI would have something about music. It used to be that music had its own computer music conferences. Then there was a big, I would say, blossom of music information retrieval, which is called ISMIR. It used to be Symposium, now it's called Society, but it's International Society for Music Information Retrieval. And it kind of paralleled the developments, let's say, of technology, that the generative music, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, was not as successful, but search on the internet, the desire to annotate, all kinds of initiatives like MPEG-7, which was an idea that you would basically annotate and allow semantic search on music databases. So that was the time kind of the music recommendation was maybe the big thing in the technology. But now actually generating music, same way you do it for language and images. So the whole, that whole field of large language models like the GPTs is now being applied to symbolic music mostly. And then for images, the diffusion models now being became very popular for audio. So I think people realize that music is actually a very interesting problem for AI. It comes with a trade-off because now the focus is on AI more than the experimental musical practice. So I kind of wanted a little bit to talk about that trade-off and actually what what kind of motivated people maybe to do computer music as research. Okay, and I don't know if it's an anecdote. I can tell you that. So when Jingwe was introducing me and giving a little bit of my bio, so I was pursuing basically two separate or parallel tracks. I was studying, science. Actually, my first degree was in physics, and then engineering, computer science. Actually, I went to computer science. So I had my degrees in sciences, and I was always playing the piano. Okay, I wasn't really seeing the combination. I mean, one was more of a passion, the other one was interest, and also kind of professional thing. And at a certain point, I realized I will not be a performing pianist. That really is demanding, and I was pursuing another career. So I said, well, I might as well go and study composition. First, I did it privately, and then actually, after I already had my master's in engineering, I decided, well, maybe it's about time for me to go and actually do an undergrad in music theory and composition. So it might sound strange, but I already had my master's in engineering, and then decided actually I want to have fun, forget about everything. I'll go and I'll study composition. So I was kind of almost switching areas. I wasn't really interested in pursuing sciences anymore. And then as things were progressing, or I would say when I was graduating my music academy, I remember Jonathan Berger, who is a composer in Stanford. Um, he came to give a summer school or workshop about Max MSP. Okay, actually, it was Max. Yeah, MSP. I don't think was still available then. It was all MIDI type of stuff. Uh, and I remember I came to the workshop because I said, well, I have the background in computer science, and I can tell you that you know my first that was my first encounter with computer music. And I can tell you frankly that I was sitting there and saying, what a dumb field. It's not computer science and it's not music. Why would somebody want to do computer music? If you want to search, if you want to do research on algorithms, the math of algorithms, stuff like that, you know, you do that in computer science. You want to write music for your soul, for your heart. I mean, why you have to drag patches and create sounds? Uh, and it's kind of cynical that 30 or 40 years after that's my profession. So I could say that it takes a while to realize why somebody would want to go and actually research computers to develop new technology for musical expression. Uh, and that I think historically there was always this trend of technology offering new tools for artists. Uh, I think there's something unique about music is that it's very amenable to experimentation. It's very easy to try out stuff. And somehow musicians very often kind of like are looking for new technologies, but also other visual artists or other artists. But in music, somehow, whenever there is some kind of new technology, there is maybe fringe artists, right? I mean, like maybe less of a mainstream, will go and find some kind of a weird algorithm to make new sounds, explore. And noises, explore some kind of automatic ways of composition, algorithmic composition. And part of this is kind of an intellectual interest, but there's also the idea that you always want to kind of like push the envelope of how you express yourself in music, to the extent that the reality changes, the society around that field changes, and it's almost like the zeitgeist, kind of the spirit of the time, pushes the composers to kind of try out some of these things. Now, in, let's say, modern music, I think today we are in a very kind of strange situation, because what we called modern music maybe was a name that could be applied at the end of the 20th century. Uh, Today it's after modern. I mean, today everything goes kind of, technology is there, all the sounds are available. I'm not saying we explored everything. I think it's going to be kind of interesting times to see what makes people creative and how you can use, let's say, AI specifically. That's kind of my main interest. But I would say at the time of the modern music, the second half of the 20th century, there was sort of um, I wouldn't say catastrophe, but I mean, there was a problem with classical music that became so complex, tonal music, Wagner, huge operas, very romantic music, and then, sound composers like Schoenberg with his 12-tone technique. Not that they wanted to have the math, because the math is so meaningful. I think what they wanted is to find ways to write music that doesn't sound like the music before. Actually, the atonal music is intentionally atonal because they felt that all the emotions and the rhythms and the romantic music was not applicable anymore. Maybe it's also the times of war, the First World War, the Second World War. They wanted something else. Xenakis came and started doing a lot of experiments with formal music and random processes. So and I kind of like to quote also Milan Kundera, who is a Czech novelist. He wrote a little article about Xenakis, why he likes his music, and actually it was kind of a reaction to being anti-romantic. He said, like, I don't want to listen to the old music the way it was. It caused all the horrors of the Second World War and stuff. When I listen to Xenakis, it's like I'm going out in the wild. I stand in the forest during, I don't know, some kind of storm, right? You have the powers, you have the huge kind of nature that kind of like you observe, and it's very unpersonal, but it has so much fascinating dynamics to it. So when I listen to Xenakis with all these kind of strange textures that go and create sonic experiences, not only that they're new, they also liberate me from that kind of emotional attachment that the classical music was already kind of like at the top of. So there's always this kind of a drive that kind of combines the idea that maybe we already explored some means of expression. Maybe we are a little bit frustrated or disappointed in the ways our culture was going. But there's always also the idea that the technology offers new challenges, and music allows us to experiment with this in a way with a very low price. I mean, if you write bad music, it will not kill anyone. I mean, it will not damage anyone. In the worst case, people walk out. Okay. But you can, there's something about like exploring ideas. Now, on that trajectory of time, I think the interesting question, and this is again, I don't know if you mentioned that, Jingue, in the class, like Attali's theories. I kind of talk about this a little bit in Music 5. So there is this economist or philosopher, French, Jacques Attali, who wrote the book Noise, The Political Economy of Music. He actually presented this kind of a hypothesis that if you understand the advances in music, they're predictive of other advances that will happen in the society and actually political economy. Uh, Now he's a little bit cherry picking. I think he's evidence. That's kind of my little criticism, but I would say you could see some very interesting points. Let's say the idea that you know, harmony and polyphony developed, like very complex music developed when the notation emerged, when people started notating music and exploring relations between voices. And said that was kind of the same time that Newton came up with these equations and the math became very symbolic. So there was this kind of scientific revolution, the approach that you treat music as some kind of mathematical object or notation, symbolic object. And that's how you basically build very intricate structures. You don't actually go and play music. You write it and you explore relations and rules. And and he said like that kind of preceded the scientific revolution. Then he said like orchestras had this division of labor. You had the musicians, you had the composer. So that preceded basically the industrial revolution, the division of labor and production lines. Record um, industry preceded the consumer technology, started replicating the mass production of stuff. Um, so I'm not saying, that it's fully correct, but it kind of gives you a little challenge to think, well, how are people now experimenting with music in the most strange ways, okay? Because I think there is something now that is really tremendously interesting. Machines can help you be much more efficient and productive in terms of making music based on their own pre-trained models. But they're usually pre-trained on existing music and existing styles. It's a little bit hard to go now outside of what the neural networks were trained to do to create a very different music, which is a little unlike text because maybe the text it learned on so much more text that it can go all over the place, and we still feel that there is enough room for innovation. But the experiments that we're doing now with, let's say, with music, with diffusion models, and even transformers trained on specific musical styles, maybe it's amazing that the music, computer can generate now music kind of out of statistics, but they're kind of the most cliche expressions. It takes the most typical answer to your prompt and will generate the music for you, which is kind of the most typical one. So then the question is, so where is the creativity? Okay, where you go outside of the domain of, just automated production of existing music that could be, you generate a lot of variations, but sometimes people call it shallow creativity because you have a huge demand on novelty. You always want to have new musical pieces, but they're not like changing the way you think about music. They're not changing the way you express yourself musically. So that's kind of the deep creativity. And the market pressure on producing a lot of music and the tools that are being now developed that actually allow that even to be sped up more and more. I mean, it's not that they will saturate the market. I think what will happen is that you probably will get a lot of music that you want for everyday use just like that. I mean, you don't need the composer anymore. Maybe you will get specific styles and you can generate music, and maybe even the artist will get some revenue from having an avatar that composes in his style. But that will not be kind of that uh, very deep, sentimental, and revolutionary way of expressing yourself with computers. So I think the next challenge will be really finding that personalized connection between the human and the machine that helps him create music. Now, I think it was always like that also when technology was more towards building musical instruments, right? I mean, you want to have more control, more expressivity. The instrument does become an extension of your body to be really expressive, uh, even in experimental musical genres like electronic music, people really get very delicate, very fine details, I was trained in classical music, so it took me a while to appreciate, let's say, um, how I would say, not popular. Well, depends what you define popular music, because jazz and popular music and rock are popular. I more mean like, loop based. I don't know if you call it techno, hip hop, stuff like that. Uh, which, I mean, we're all conservative to some extent because we're trained to listen to some type of music. Others sounds not so interesting. And it took me a while to realize that even, in techno with loops, to make it interesting, you put so much detail on filters and filter sweeps. There's always something going on. It's not just that loop. I mean, that loop just going over and over. And that would be kind of the default way of listening to it, which will make it very boring. But actually, a DJ really tweaks it and changes and layers it with really fine effects. So all of these filters become really part of the composition. It's very much like maybe when you listen to some non-Western music and shakuhachi flute, and you're trying to listen to melodies, but it's not about melodies. It's about like how he approaches the note and like he makes the noise, and it's like that you might not think it's music. So until you realize that this is how he expresses himself. So I think this idea of really fine-tuning your sensibility to music, okay, uh, is something that is required to turn like technology into an instrument. And now when the technology becomes more of an agent, right, then the question is, well, it becomes so intelligent, right? You can talk to it, you can kind of specify things, and it'll generate now chunks of music. And it's almost like a question, well, do you lose your sensibility when you're so rational about it? When you have to write stuff and you can explain things, how do you develop that sensibility of things that you cannot express in words, that it's very hard to express in any other formal way with programming? So the instrument has an advantage that it's tangible. You Even if it's a mixing board or a DJ set, right? You have buttons. You still are playing with this live. Most of what's going on now with AI is done in huge, basically batches. Everything is done offline, right? So one way is, I hope more and more of these technologies will come to stage to be performed with, so that will create that level of engagement and listening. So what I think will be the next challenge in music technology is actually allowing the machines to listen better. Machines will have to listen to you, will have to understand what kind of expression you have. So you'll be listening to the machine will be listening to you, because now the instrument is becoming more autonomous, but that means it not only has the intelligence, it also has the sensibility. I don't know how it'll be achieved, okay? But I think this is kind of something that music will require. So from the stuff that we're trying to develop in this co-creativity project and all the machine improvisation work, I think like at certain philosophical level, what we're trying to do is actually to create machines that are more sensible, that can actually be co-creative with you by better communicating, better understanding what you want, not just generating something that kind of the patterns make sense, but maybe creating sort of a dialogue. Now, if that's the direction, that means that maybe later on you'll have machines also in other domains that will actually latch into your mentality, which becomes scary, right? I mean, maybe for music, that's fine to have a machine that kind of tries to really understand and manipulate you emotionally so you create an interaction. But think now that the ChatGPT is going now to, instead of providing you the answers, will kind of start manipulating you emotionally. Okay, it will actually, you know, create, um, I don't know, like psychological issues, right? I mean, music, you want to create emotions in other fields, but if I can think about possible extensions of what we're trying to do in music, and I'm not saying we're succeeding, but at least we're pursuing this problem. I guess that will happen also later on with all the agents that that AI now develops. That these agents will have better and better model of the human. They will understand what drives you, what makes you, like or dislike things. And it's not in terms of marketing. It's well, marketing also does that, right? They want to know what you like and push you advertisements. Here it's on a daily basis. Okay, uh, your assistant, your daily assistant, your ChatGPT will, in some sense, get to know you so well that it might become scary. It's really can be uh, um, not. It's not an issue of privacy. It's an issue of, do you want somebody, do you want a machine really to have a model of your psychic? Okay. And at least in music, it does seem that we're a little bit looking into these questions. You want the machine to be sensitive to musician counts, he plays with the machine has its own way of generating music, its own repertoire, but you want the machine now to listen to you and find the best way to communicate, and the response should be find the right parameters. So if you're playing rhythms, it will kind of try to respond in rhythms. If you're playing with melodies, it will try to kind of understand what kind of harmonies and melodies to play with it. If you're doing rhythmic stuff, you're doing noise stuff. So I think a lot of the machine learning is now really trying to see how you communicate with the machine. Not, I think we go beyond the deep fake, beyond the idea of machine being able to generate and produce um, you know convincing and high professionally kind of high quality music or images and stuff like that. It's not only that it can generate now complex art. I think now it's more of a question, at least in music. Now the machine has to listen to you and try to understand what kind of. So the setting is really an improvisation setting. You play with a machine, so the machine not only should be able to generate interesting materials, it should be able to understand from the music that you play what kind of logic you have, in the sense of like what musical parameters, what temporal parameters, what rhythmical parameters you use, how you basically structure your phrases, how you structure expressions, and then kind of try to adapt itself to you. So that means it kind of tries to get very personal in terms of your aesthetic preferences and your sensibilities. So I would say this is kind of the idea of where it is music, it's computer science, but I think it's really a lot of this is about understanding the human psychic, right? Or what actually drives us, what makes us feel that music is, you know, engaging, questions of like aesthetics, emotions, stuff like that. Uh, so that's kind of where I think my kind of research goes. Um, I can let me see. I mean, I can play some examples of musical pieces, and yeah, I'll.
Is there any questions? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Or engage in some discussions. Actually, I would like to hear from you. I mean, what's your takeaway from the class? I mean, you covered a lot of grounds, a lot of technical grounds about
Yeah.
acoustics, signal processing, and stuff like that. So, yeah, let's I'd love to hear from you a little bit.
Yeah, maybe I can kind of start. I have like really several questions,
Mhm.
um, but maybe let's start with the most recent topic is the creativity. So when you think about this computer creativity, so you try to like involve human or not involve human, like so your creativity is defined under the circumstance under the context of interaction with human, then the human inspired the computer creativity, or after the computer kind of learning different styles and it creates some new style of music generation. So like yeah.
I think it's a great question. I mean, in the sense of, if I hope I understood right. Uh, Actually, what is creativity and um And I would say what we're trying to do in some sense is not answer your question about machines being creative, but rather bypass it and say we want a machine to be co-creative. Okay. In the sense that you know, a machine can be creative in different ways in any kind of deep fake, okay, or music that is being generated based on a prompt that kind of sounds legit, right? It could be considered very creative. But I think that kind of immediately, brings up the questions of authorship and you know, where is that kind of creative intent and what did the machine try to say? I mean, you could say, well, I mean, I prompted it, so that was kind of my piece, and whatever I expressed was the desire. But usually, the mapping is like you just give some very general descriptions, and then you generate the music. Um, so I think if we go to the next step of co-creativity, which means that the human and the machine have to get into some kind of a synergy. It will still be the human in some sense who is responsible for choosing the type of expression. Okay. I don't know how much of that he will negotiate and delegate to the machine, but still, I mean, I think this joint loop is the way kind of to bypass the questions of authorship, sorry, to bypass the questions of intent, creative intent, and kind of the meaning and the desire to express something will still rely on the human. Uh, Now, how much effort the human will put into this work, and whether you'll be able to tell that there was a human who was actually, you know, we have this problems now. Like we anticipate, we still don't have it so much, but like in classes that we teach and allow students kind of who have very little musical background kind of go and compose music. It could be by mixing tapes or doing some kind of a more abstract compositions. uh it's clear that somebody had to kind of like record sounds, put them together, create like a tape music that is meaningful and you follow some kind of interesting development. Now with Suno AI and then Udio and others, you prompt and you get a song. Okay. And then, if somebody gives me this as a final project, right? For a music class, what do I do? Except for saying, well, it sounds too good, so I'm suspicious, right? I don't exclude it. It's not like in some writing classes that you don't want people to use ChatGPT. Here, it's fine. I think technology should be part of music making. But then the question becomes how much of effort you put into interacting with that machine, and what is the granularity and the extent of interventions that you put into producing the final piece. If you really make a lot of your choices, you can also explain them well. Okay. You can describe this by either, accompanying text or drawing or some kind of a, you know, it's sometimes very difficult for a person even to understand what somebody else's music piece means. Okay. Because, I'm not in your mindset. I don't know what really drives you. If it's not really an established music that I'm very familiar with, it might take a while. So, especially in experimental genres or things that we have never heard before, I think the ability to express yourself and be in control of, very fine control of these decisions that the machine can help you produce, I think that becomes co-creativity. Okay. So simple prompt is not really co-creative. Okay, of course you can do everything manually, but I think a process where you kind of iterate, get maybe raw materials, create some interesting examples with using tools. Uh, I think that's where you also uh, get to some new results. I think it becomes uh, surprising also for the creator. You kind of like find something which is not trivial, and you don't always even expect it. I mean,
Yeah,
I can show an example of
sure, sure.
I don't know if um, let me see one example of a piece like that. Um, let me see if I also have a little bit of an explanation of how it was done. But as I said, we are recently experimenting a lot with this text to music uh, uh, tools, developing our own language audio pre-training mechanism and stuff like that. So I'll just jump to one example, okay? Let's see if I can. Yeah, here. This. Oh, sorry. Excuse me, playing advertisements.
Are you sharing the sound or?
Just a second. I'll share the screen in a second.
Okay.
I just want to spare you from uh, going through. Okay, so let's see. Maybe I have, time for two quick examples, okay? One is just more of a conceptual experiment just to show the basic tools that we developed. I'll share the screen. So this is an experiment we did with the technology, with tools that we developed, technologies that we developed, which is text to music. Okay. Now, text to music, like diffusion models in visual art, usually have to describe what type of music you want to perform. Okay. Which means, I want a certain genre, certain instruments, a certain feel. So you actually have to describe in words the music. Now, uh, an interesting question to me was, well, how do you actually now? And it's less the musical result because we'll hear that the musical result is a little bit kind of very typical or cliche. But can you write music to poetry? Okay, basically, can a computer be inspired by poetry? And here we actually had the computer generate fully automatically, okay, or almost fully automatically because we had to involve, certain different tools to a poem by Maria Rilke, who is a German poet. So I'll play just one short segment of it. Let me see if I show the sound. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna like stop it here because I want to show one more example. And unfortunately, I'll have to, like in 10, 15 minutes, I'll have to run. I have to be in an hour in the conference. So the idea here was, well, how can you actually get inspired by text and generate music using our latent diffusion model, the musical DM? And the process for doing that was actually the following. Okay, we took the poem line by line. Okay, and then we put it into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to give us the musical imagery. So they actually so ChatGPT translated musical imagery to description of how the music that best fits this, this paragraph or that sentence uh, would sound. Okay, so actually, it was pretty amazing that ChatGPT could kind of suggest musical interpretations based on mood, based on something that kind of seemed to work, although you could see that from one sentence to another, the music changed. There was no coherence. There was no like development. It wasn't like first theme, second theme development. It was like a bunch of chunks that somehow corresponded to the text. Okay, but the whole notion of being able to do metaphorical mapping between feelings that are implied in very abstract text, create a description in text of the musical imagery, and then have a machine generate the sounds themselves. All the sounds were generated by a machine. I mean, nobody composed any music here. So that was kind of the first experiment. And then we kind of realized that, well, everything is nice. The problem is that you really want more engagement. And the materials might be more interesting, less interesting. You have to have more choice. And so in the next example I want to show is this piece. Let me see if I can show it on YouTube. And this is with okay, with the sound poem, a sound poet, Jaap Blanc, okay, who is a sound poet, and
Plus, curly brackets open.
So what we have here is these are his.
入力お願い。はい。経験やスキルを伸ばすために何をすべき？
Oh, sorry about that. So what you can see, these are his poems. Sound poetry is really abstract way of creating sounds, going on stage and doing performances. So these are
by artificial intelligence. He showed us on Friday what he did with the poem of Rilke. And when we were asked to do something, present something here, I thought, why not send Mr. Dubnov a sound poem and see what he can do with that. And I think it came out really nice. And the sounds are here being put through so much by Georges Bloch. And I will read the poem entitled 5 Encrypted Proposals or 5 Propositions Encryptées.
Okay, that's
Curly brackets open, curly brackets closed. Oh!
so that's every point.
Parentheses open, parentheses closed. $%. Oh! $%. Oh! Plus curly brackets open. Curly brackets closed. $%. Curly brackets open. Curly brackets closed. Oh! Plus curly brackets open. Curly brackets closed. Plus curly brackets open. Curly brackets closed.
So it's very weird. I mean, yeah, especially if you're not familiar with sound poetry. Just think about this as a performance, right? But I want to point out some some of the tools or some of the ideas. First of all, again, we generated again the text using the encrypted proposals, and ChatGPT gave us the description. So from this Pew whatever Pro something, it told us a mysterious and ethereal piece, greed is lurking. Okay, and then I don't know whatever the last one or the first three, ChatGPT looked at this sequence and said electronic beats and rhythmic trumpet looping. I think that's kind of pretty strange. I mean, how that like language intelligence could take such a text and give this interpretation. And then we actually generate a lot of the materials. But then here, I mean, this is George Block. We put them into an improvisation software. Okay. That improvisation software has actually a huge collection of possible renderings of these prompts to music. And it was also listening through the microphone. So there was the level of synchronization when he did some some sharp sounds or breaks and beginnings segments, it would trigger notes. So it created this sense of interaction that included, I would say, choice of the music materials based on this very kind of strange artificial intelligence interpretation of sound poetry, collecting all of these possibilities as raw materials, okay, into a software that now allows to play with this. It's almost like DJing, but it's DJing in a slightly different way, where another musical input basically drives the DJing process. And there is also kind of the DJ, George Bloch, who also manually oversees this whole interaction process. So yeah, it's very experimental, fringe in a sense. Okay, maybe you can envision these things done in more established genres. Maybe this could be done, classical rock or some world music. But I think now we're kind of talking about the ability of the machine, first of all, to go a little bit outside of just being an instrument. It will kind of try to interpret what we want to do, suggest its own versions of sounds, and then you put it into some sort of a agent framework where now you interact with this agent to actually make a performance. So I would say that's kind of the framework that we're trying to discuss and develop. and mostly trying to understand what makes a good interaction, okay, between two musicians or musician and a machine, while the machine has to be versatile enough to have a lot of possible musical answers, but then create a dialogue so it will kind of do almost like a Q&A, but I mean this is not call and response. It has to be done kind of in parallel. So yeah, that's kind of the research that we're doing. Also Jingwe's research, right, about LSTMs and models of brain free energy.
Yeah.
And I guess you advertise your class to this class, right? Your workshop next month.
Oh yeah, yeah. I thought about my workshop. Yeah, it's not. It's another thing. Yeah, it's more about like symbolic music generation.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I have a question about this work. So how did you prompt the ChatGPT use the poetry?
Just the prompt itself. That's what it was. I mean, I input the text and asked ChatGPT to give me musical imagery that best corresponds to this type of poetry. I
So
mean,
yeah, so your input is the text. It is not the sound that the artist made, right? So
it-
so when you do this in real time with the artist, how do you do that? Because he is actually making the voice, so you only input the text he's kind of pronouncing to the
right, right.
machine.
So let me see. So this is, and Georgia was running a software that is being developed in Earcom, but that's kind of a joint project for many years. Somax. Let me see if I can find something quickly. Somax, Earcom. So this is kind of an improvisation software. Actually, I can maybe quickly find another improvisation with Somax, which was done symbolically. Okay, let me see. Oh, this actually. Let me see where can I find. So what Somax does? Just a second. What Somax does, it actually allows you to input a corpus, okay, of music. It could be MIDI, it could be audio also, okay? And then it listens to another musical input and it tries to select from that corpus something that best corresponds to what you're playing, okay? So the interactivity is actually happening using Somax, and the prompts and musical DM just created a big collection of possible musical materials that the Somax could jump and select based on the improvisation of or based on the performance. So the audio of Jap was a trigger to Somax to find the clip that it will play back. Okay.
I see. So the clip is generated using this LDM, right? Diffusion model.
And the selection of which clip to play is run by Somax.
I see. I see.
So here, Somax, this is an example of improvisation. This is all MIDI symbolic, where I'm trying to improvise on a piece by Stravinsky. So that's MIDI, Rite of Spring. And what you will hear is like, watch my hands. You'll see that I'm performing only few musical gestures or musical segments, and the machine generates many more. So that's kind of like. So kind of the idea here is that's an existing musical piece that's ballet by Stravinsky, and whenever I play some kind of musical segment, a chord or a melody, it kind of finds the corresponding section in that musical piece, retrieves it, and starts playing it with me, and then I can switch and kind of tries to find these smooth transitions. So it's me kind of improvising with the rite of spring by triggering memories from that piece, and it plays with me. Okay, so it's a very bizarre way of thinking about improvisation. It's basically me kind of playing around with an existing musical score, but not playing it, but just like playing a segment, and the score will kind of play for me the rest, and then I'll play something else and we'll jump and play it for me. So it's kind of a remix. Now, because here the piece is known, I think for me it was interesting because I love that. I love the piece. But people actually perform with this because they kind of record their own materials as the bass line or as that corpus, okay? And then they improvise with that corpus. So you get like a very rich expression where you basically navigate either one piece or multiple pieces in the corpus with another input. So for the musician, it becomes kind of a game, performance challenge, I don't know, navigating. He kind of gets inspired with what the computer plays, although he might know what the computer can do, but still it becomes a little bit more of a game kind of. So a lot of the machine improvisation right now is done this way. Actually, yesterday we had also some examples of DJs doing very much beat-based music. And then maybe it doesn't sound as weird, but they would basically kind of, all the music materials would be selected on the fly or generated on the fly. But because it was very kind of like synchronized in time, you could get pretty nice, I don't know. Again, it's noise music, techno music. I'm not sure how to call it dubstep. It's not. I mean, it's kind of that experimental mix. I mean, uh, I'm kind of trying to see if I can kind of recommend any of the other more popular musical examples. Well, let me see. Was actually
Is that like Japanese DJ,
uh,
electronic music?
yes. So let's say. Okay, well, that's his book on creativity, but he was actually giving a talk yesterday in this conference now, Takui. And he's a DJ, and he's doing a lot of these kind of AI driven remixes or basically DJ sets. Which in some sense I think is a great example of somebody who actually, again, I don't know if it's mainstream, but it's definitely less fringe than what I was showing, less experimental. But I think in his case, it's really more about like 4x4 rhythm based work. He actually has a GitHub if you want to take a look at all of his. Yeah, so he has rhythmic VAE and GAN rhythms, and some of them are his, some he adopted, and he also has audio. He has audio LDM that he cloned. So this is kind of more of a mainstream popular musician. He was in Google I/O. He was the opening musician, and he performs in kind of pretty popular venues. But that's what he does also with these kind of things. I think the challenge is he really focused mostly on rhythm as a DJ. So that's I think we'll be trying to deal with melodies, harmonies, timbres, things which are much harder to represent. So that's where some of the AI comes in, trying actually to learn when I said listening, that means, yeah, finding the representation that actually is sensible to little changes in music that you can actually connect to and communicate with the machine and the human. Jingwei, thank you. I mean, I'll have to run. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get too much to discuss, to hear from you. I'm just getting a little stressed in time. I don't want to be late.
That's fun. So you have something after this, like immediately?
Yes. Yeah.
I
No.
see, I see.
Well, I mean, it's transportation. I'm in Tokyo. Transportation here takes hours, so I have something in an hour, and yeah, I need to
Yeah.
run.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks for coming. Thanks for
Okay.
your talk. And
Sure.
see you.
Okay.
Thank you.